I'm District Attorney Amy Weirich. Today, I am releasing to the public the complete Tennessee Bureau of Investigation file on the fatal shooting of Willie Hudson Jr. by on-duty Shelby County Sheriff's Office deputies and Memphis Police Department officers. On September 18, 2019, officers of the multi-agency gang unit were trying to locate and arrest Willie Hudson Jr. on felony warrants for criminal attempt murder in the first degree and convicted felon in possession of a handgun. The MGU officers requested the assistance of the Shelby County Sheriff's Office Fugitive Apprehension Team, as well as the Memphis Police Department K-9 unit. In addition to being wanted for attempting to kill a man a week earlier, as well as the convicted felon in possession of a handgun charge, Mr. Hudson had a prior conviction for robbery. Officers found the defendant hiding in a crawl space behind a bookcase. He fired upon the officers and they returned fire. One of the officers was wounded, removed from the scene, and Willie Hudson continued to fire at the officers remaining. In the end, Willie Hudson sustained 58 gunshot wounds to the torso, arm, leg, and feet, and he died as a result of those gunshot wounds. At my request, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation conducted a complete investigation into the facts leading up to Willie Hudson's death. When that investigation was over, they delivered the file to my office, and our officer-involved shooting review team reviewed the file. Our responsibility is to determine if state criminal laws have been violated. It is not our responsibility to determine whether policies of either the Memphis Police Department or the Sheriff's Office have been broken. After reviewing all of the facts and all of the evidence, it is my finding that the officers in this case were justified in using the deadly force that they did. While the number of gunshot wounds sustained by Hudson may sound shocking, they are not relevant to the legal analysis. Hudson was shot that many times because of his actions, because of his decisions, because of his choices that day. The officers were merely reacting, as they are trained to do, as they are expected to do, and as they are legally justified to do, to protect themselves as well as those in the vicinity. What you're about to see is a brief video of what happened on September 18th. It does contain some body-worn camera footage. The Memphis Police Department officers on the scene were wearing body-worn cameras. The Shelby County Sheriff's deputies were not. In addition to this brief video, the entire file that was given to our office is available for your viewing on our office website, www.scdag.com. As I mentioned, on September 18, 2019, members of the multi-agency gang unit were looking for Willie Hudson Jr. to arrest him on a warrant for criminal attempt murder in the first degree and convicted felon in possession of a handgun. They found him inside of a single-wide mobile home at 1230 Haven Circle, just off of Hernando Road. He had a prior conviction for a robbery, theft, as well as possession with intent. This is a map of the area in South Memphis where this incident occurred. MGU officers cleared several occupants from the mobile home and learned that Hudson was hiding inside a false wall behind a bookcase. MGU contacted the Shelby County Sheriff's Office Fugitive Apprehension Team, as well as the Memphis Police Department K-9 unit. MPD officers had body-worn cameras, sheriff's officers did not. They mobilized outside of the mobile home at 1230 Haven Circle. Multiple officers announced their presence and repeatedly shouted for Hudson to surrender, but received no response. Two acquaintances said that Hudson had made the comment that he was not going back to jail and that he would not be coming out alive. The MPD officer with the K-9 and the two sheriff's deputies entered a small room where Hudson was hiding in a crawl space behind a bookcase. As the two deputies pulled the bookcase back from the wall, they were immediately fired upon by Hudson. One deputy was shot several times in the arm and in the thigh. Officers then returned fire. The officer with the canine located the bookcase which covered the suspect's hiding spot in the wall. The canine officer's body-worn camera shuts off as his dog pulls away from him. As the two deputies pulled back the bookcase, which was nailed to the wall, they were met with gunfire from Hudson. One deputy was struck 3 times. This is footage, video and audio from the exterior of the mobile home. The injured deputy was removed from the scene and taken to a hospital. In the chaos, the canine bit another deputy who also was taken to a hospital. This shows the wall space where Willie Hudson Jr. was hiding. The initial gunfire stopped briefly, then resumed when one deputy who was clearing the room said Hudson, who was still in the hiding space, reached for his gun at his side. He disregarded my commands, and at that time I was forced to use my weapon. The deputy said he pushed the suspect's gun away with his foot when Hudson was no longer moving. It's a photograph of the gun used by Willie Hudson. The deputy who was wounded said Hudson's gunfire came through the bookcase and struck him before he saw the suspect. The only thing I saw were muzzle flashes from a gun coming from a big dark square in the wall. Other deputies who fired said they saw the first officer getting shot and returned fire because they thought Hudson was going to kill them all. Hudson was pronounced dead at the scene at 3:50 p.m. As I stated earlier, the autopsy revealed that he sustained 58 gunshot wounds to his torso, arms, leg, and feet. After Hudson fired, 4 sheriff's deputies and 1 police officer returned fire. The initial exchange of gunfire lasted 12 seconds. Another shot was fired 18 seconds later. A final round of gunfire came 40 seconds after that. Total time elapsed was 1 minute and 13 seconds. Within that 1 minute and 13 seconds, there's a total of 15 seconds of gunfire. Our United States Supreme Court has said that when deciding whether an officer's use of deadly force was reasonable in a given situation, that evaluation must be judged from the perspective of the officer at the time and not with 20/20 hindsight vision. The calculus of reasonableness must embody allowance for the fact that police officers are often forced to make split-second judgments in circumstances that are tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving. In this case, there was no time for the officers to weigh their options. They were immediately fired upon by a suspect hiding in a false wall behind a bookcase. The 3 officers in the small room returned fire, including an officer who was struck at least 3 times by the suspect's bullets. After the wounded officer was removed, 2 additional officers fired shots after one officer shouted at the suspect, "Don't touch that weapon." This incident unfolded after multiple officers had gathered outside the trailer. Some had been there for more than an hour. Once inside, they announced their presence and they urged the suspect to surrender. They got no response. The suspect was a violent felony offender who was wanted on a warrant involving the attempted murder of a man a week earlier in a Whitehaven apartment complex. The suspect had told acquaintances that he was not going back to jail and that he was not coming out alive. Instead, he opened fire on deputies as soon as they began moving the bookcase behind which he was hiding. The laws of the state of Tennessee allow an officer to use deadly force when the officer or officers have probable cause to believe that the individual to be arrested poses a threat of serious bodily injury, either to the officers or to others, unless immediately apprehended. That was clearly the case in this situation. While the number of shots fired was considerable, the shots came from 5 different officers who were in a sudden life or death situation in a chaotic environment, unfolding in a small room with no place for the officers to take cover. I believe these officers acted lawfully in their response to being fired upon by this suspect, who again was hiding in a wall behind a bookcase only a short distance away from the officers. Weighing all of the facts and circumstances, my finding is that this was a justified use of deadly force by these officers.